Hello everyone and welcome to an incredible attacking game from this year's Dubai Open. This is round 2 and we've just finished with Sharjah, but now most of the players are playing in Dubai. They had like a 1 day rest and now they have to play a grueling tournament again. It's a 9-round Swiss tournament, 90 minutes per player, plus 30 seconds increments, so pretty standard normal classical tournament. And here we have Hans, Moke and Niemann facing a very strong Azerbaijani grandmaster, Vugar Asadli. There's a bit of a rating difference, but that makes the games all the more interesting. Now my camera has died a little bit, but it returned, so that's great. So let's check it out and see what happened here. So Hans with the white pieces opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6. Sorry about that. And pawn to c4. So pretty standard stuff. We have bishop to g6, knight to c3, and bishop to g7. The King's Indian defense is on the board. E4 and d6. We have pawn to h3, the Makagonov variation, and now pawn to e5, asking white to advance the pawn to d5. White, of course, does that as you don't want to trade queens, and now pawn to a5. And now okay, it's a pretty standard line. You know that the knight is coming on a6, then maybe to b4, maybe to c5. You might have access to the d4 pawn. You might have access to d3. You might even have access to b3. All depends on what white plays. We have bishop to e3, and now knight to a6. Vugar continues the knight's journey, knight to f3, and now usually you will see castles and knight to c5 here, but we have bishop to d7, which has only been played once, and now there is a game, the one that I mentioned, where bishop to d3 was played. It was played last year, or maybe in 2020, yeah, in 2022, between Lucas van Forest and Kirill Shevchenko, that ended by Shevchenko winning, but instead we have pawn to g4, and it is now, as of move 9, that we have a completely new game. So let's see what happens here. Knight to c5. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. He doesn't come, the entire day, and then as soon as I start recording, he just arrives. But okay, knight to c5. At least you had time to study the position properly. Queen to c2. We have queen to e7, and now both players castle. But here we have castles queen side, and Vugar goes for castles king side. So now, okay, you have castles on opposite sides of the board. Obviously, there's going to be some attacking going on, but it's very hard for Hans to actually attack the black king. As okay, you know that the queen will come to this diagonal. You're probably going to want to trade off the dark square bishops, but how do you advance the pawn? You can't play h4 at any point, as the g4 pawn would hang. So here we have bishop to e2. Standard moves here that you will want to play include king to b1, bishop to e2, and then at some point start some sort of an attack on the king side. But here we have bishop to e2 first, pawn to a4, and now Hans needs to decide whether he wants to allow pawn to a3 or not. If you allow it, well, you could play something like king to b1, and then after pawn to a3, b3. So it's possible to play something like this, then rook f to b8, then b5 comes, and well, it's a possibility, but Hans decides to play a3, so he stops a3 by Vugar, but now he allows knight to b3 check. And okay, it could be preferable. King to b1, and now pawn to c5, advancing that pawn, and you know that now b5 is coming, or first is going to be prepared. So Hans captures on c6 en passant, b captures, and now queen to d3, putting pressure on that d6 pawn, but now knight to d4. Vugar sacrifices the first of many pawns that will be offered this game. Knight captures on d4, e captures, bishop captures, and now pawn to c5, trying to chase the bishop back, but the problem is if you go back with the bishop, then the e4 pawn will become weak. Let's say bishop to c6, and yes, you can play pawn to f3. It's very nice. You won a pawn, but then rook f to b8, and for the price of one pawn, black gets a very nice attack. Black can play rook to b3, then double up on the b file. Doesn't look like something you want to play. So instead, after c5, bishop captures on c6. Hans gives up the dark square bishop. Queen captures, and now queen captures on d6. So Hans wins the second pawn. but he's now down a dark square bishop. So there is only one move if you don't want to trade queens because, well, the queen and the bishop are under attack. So bishop to e6, and now Hans just grabs another pawn. Queen captures on c5. And okay, you grab 3 pawns. If you don't get checkmated, of course, you are winning this game. So can Hans avoid being checkmated? Rook f to b8 by Vugar, and now Hans needs to decide. The problem is, and of course now rook f to b8, as soon as it was played, it introduced the threat of queen captures on c3. Now the b pawn is pinned. The problem is, if you just sidestep this threat, you run into this threat. Rook captures on b2. With check, king captures, queen captures on c3 check, and of course you get checkmated. So pretty standard stuff. So Hans gives back 1 pawn, plays pawn to e5, in hopes of trading queens, because okay, he gives up 1 pawn, he trades queens, he's still up 2 pawns in an endgame. So queen to f4, of course Vugar declines this. Knight to b5 now, very nicely closing off the b file, and now bishop captures on e5 with queen to e3, offering a trade as the queen and the bishop are attacked, but just queen f6. Vugar can defend his bishop from f6. g5 now, trying to kick away the queen, and the bishop to f5 with check. With bishop to d3, not bishop captures, but first queen to e6, and now bishop captures on f5. Queen captures also comes with check, and now queen to d3. Offering a queen trade, but now just queen captures on g5, so winning back some material. And now Hans is only up 1 pawn, but okay, he still survived the attack. We have queen to c2, and now bishop to f6. We have rook to d7, getting the rook into the attack, and here we have queen to f4. There was a very tricky move here that sort of wins the game for Vugar, but it's not an easy one to spot. Bishop captures on b2. Was that on your spidey sense? Because after bishop captures on b2, there's no good way to reply to this. If you play king captures on b, or even worse, if queen captures, then just queen to f5 check picks up the rook on d7. So you're gonna have to capture with the king, but now rook captures on b5 with check. And the problem, maybe it was considered, maybe it wasn't, is that it's very hard to meet this rook captures on b5 check. The problem is if you capture, then just queen captures on b5 check, again picks up the rook on d7, and then you're just, I mean, you have, okay, it's not the worst material disadvantage. You're only down a pawn, but your king is wide in the open. I mean, if this rook ever comes to b3, there's just no playing this. So the only thing you could do here is that after this rook captures on b5 check, you don't recapture, just play king to a2, and now it's you know, maybe you can survive this, but after rook b3 it just looks really, really bad. I mean, if the black queen somehow gets access to the a3 pawn, for the moment you can't do it because all of these squares are covered. Also the e7 square is covered, but at some point you're gonna probably be able to do it, and should be just straight out winning for black. So bishop captures on b2, definitely a great move, but queen to f4 was played, and now rook h to d1. Hans gets his other rook into the game. We have rook to a6, and now rook to c1. Here, Hans struggles finding a viable plan. Rook to d6 looks like something you might wanna do, trying to offer a rook trade and also putting pressure on the bishop here. But he plays rook to c1, and now we have rook to c6, putting pressure on the pawn here. Probably why rook to c1 was played, to add additional support to the c4 pawn. Rook to d5, and now we have bishop to g5. And here the threat, of course, is queen captures on c1, just winning the exchange. And what Hans should play is rook to g1 here, but it's such a difficult move to spot, because if rook to g1, look at this, rook captures on c4, of course, okay, everyone sees that. Rook to g4 is the idea. This is the best way for white to continue the game without just losing terribly. And if rook captures on c2, rook captures on f4, now you're going to grab another pawn, just, you know, for good measure. And now bishop captures on f4, you're going to be up a pawn, and you know, you probably will not win this game, but you do have chances of winning this game. You know, it would be the best course of action for Hans. But Hans decided to go for rook captures on g5. He gives up the exchange to win back some more material. And now it's very, very exciting. Queen captures on g5, queen captures on a4, and now queen to f5 with check. rook to c2, and queen captures on h3. So now if you count the material, okay, Vugar is up the exchange, but Hans is up a pawn. If he can start pushing those queenside pawns, could be very dangerous, but of course not with so much firepower on the board. So knight to d4 attacks the rook, and now rook to d6 attacks the knight, and here Hans starts advancing the pawn. Pawn to c5, the knight is nicely defended. If he can get his c pawn to c7, that's going to be worth at least an exchange. However, c5 is actually what loses the game for Hans, but it's not easy to spot why, so feel free to pause the video and try to win the game for Vugar while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this wild maneuver. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is of course queen to f1 with check. Another video where our winning strategy starts with check, but it's not easy to see why. And the reason is that after king to a2, there's this very cool rook to a6 idea, and after the queen moves, you're just going to play rook captures on a3. You give up a full rook. Now you can't capture with the pawn. If you capture with the pawn, queen to b1 is checkmate, so you're going to have to capture with the king, but it's not much better. Queen to a1 with check, queen has to block, and now of course just rook to a8 check will pick up the white queen. Doesn't matter where the king goes, rook captures or queen captures, and of course it's game over. So the real question is what happens after this queen to f1 check. If rook to c1 is played as it was played in the game, Hans of course did not go for king to a2. Hans played rook to c1. The real move is not the one that Vugar played. Vugar played queen captures on f2. The real move is queen to d3 with check, because this connects with the knight, and if the knight goes back, knight to c2, now you play rook to d5, and there's just not all that much white can play here. For example, if c6, you're going to play rook to c5, and that's pretty much it. White is out of moves. However, queen captures on f2 was played instead, and now we have knight to b5, attacking the rook on d6. The way to defend is queen to c2. With queen to c2, probably you can still fight. For example, queen captures, knight captures. Of course, you have to move the knight. Now rook d5 attacks the pawn, and if knight b4 attacking the rook, rook to d2. And now, of course, if c6, king to f8, c7, rook to c8, and you don't really have to worry. There's no way to punish the rook for being on c8. There's no easy way to attack it with the knight. You need too many moves, and black is just, will be winning here. So instead, after queen captures on f2, knight to b5 was played, and now rook to d2, putting pressure on the b2 pawn, queen to b3 defending, and now rook to e8, preparing to triple up on the second rank, knight to d6 attacking the rook, and just rook e to e2. And how do you defend now? The only move is knight to c4, but now queen to f5 with check, king to a2, and now queen captures on c5. So Hans loses his precious c5 pawn, but it was necessary in order to prevent getting checkmated. So now you can't really capture. If you capture, then you just trade down into a losing endgame. So rook to c3, Hans's last stand, but now rook back to d8. We have pawn to a4, Hans tries pushing the pawn, rook to e1. We have knight to b6 now, and queen to g1, going after rook to a1 checkmate. Queen to b5 now, freeing up the a3 square for the white king, but now it's officially a king hunt. Rook to a1 with check, king b3, queen to d1 with check, now king to b4, and now rook to b1, preparing to win the pawn and the game. So knight to c4, and now queen to d4, pinning the knight. So now rook captures on b2 is once again a threat. Pawn to b3, and now queen to f4. We have queen to e5, trying to trade queens here. And even though you could do this and still win the game, there's no reason to do it. Rook to b8 with check, king to a3, now rook to a1 check, and this is how you properly trade queens. Not just trading queens into winning endgame, trading queens into a winning endgame, and snatching a pawn while you're at it. So here, king to b2, and now queen captures on e5, knight captures on e5, and of course rook captures on a4 as the b pawn is pinned. There's no capturing the pawn back, so now you're just up too much material. Knight to c6 was played. Now it's merely a matter of how many moves is Hans willing to make before resigning. Of course, you could still play something like rook to c8 and run into a nice fork, but rook to b7 is played, and that's pretty much it. Knight to d8, we have rook to b6, and it was in this position on move 58 that Hans Moke Niemann resigned the game, and a brilliant victory for Vugar Asadli, who takes down a 2700 grandmaster. So very nicely done. The problem is there's no good way to play. The knight is pretty much trapped. There's no way to go. If you try to bring the knight back, it's very easy to win. Just pawn to h5. I mean, you just bring the king in, you push the pawns. There's no counterplay for white. If pawn to b4, you can even capture this. I mean, you gladly give up the rook for knight and pawn, and now you're just up 3 pawns and completely winning. So there are many ways you can win this. Hans decides that it's best to just resign and end it there. So yeah, a very exciting game. With as soon as I saw castling on opposite sides, I knew it was going to be a wild game. But I mean, as Vugar just started sacrificing pawn by pawn by pawn. First, he gives up this central d4 pawn, then he gives up another pawn on d6, then on c5, and Hans just couldn't take the pressure. He had to start giving back pawns, but then once the material again sort of equalized, he ended up with a worse position. So yeah, very nice done. Very exciting game. Really enjoyed it. If you have any of your own favorites from the Dubai Open, use hashtag suggestion, and I will go over your suggestions. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry about the interruption by the mailman and by my camera. I'm trying to fix this. I still haven't found a reason why it's happening. I would like to thank golfsoftware.com, Marcus Grabel, Anonymous, MK1, and Buntiak Punk for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Dubai Open and everything else that's happening in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.